A sale is not a comparable until the appraiser determines it has the same highest and best use as the subject.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
All right, everybody, welcome to the program. Dustin Harris hanging out with you once again, the podcast chair. I'm broadcasting from home today. Got a great guest coming up. If you're on YouTube, you can see him in the wings, in the green room, as it were. But first, want to remind you that we're sponsored by a couple great companies, OREP Insurance being one of them. You can find out more at orep.org, and a la mode. A la mode is found at 800 a la mode, or you can, of course, look them up on the web at alamode.com. I want to welcome back to the program the most frequent guest that I have on the Appraiser Coach podcast, a guy that's much smarter than me. He is an MAI, he is a USPAP instructor, and an all-around fun to be around guy, Mr. Tim Anderson. Welcome back.
Dustin, thank you. And just so you know, there's absolutely nothing green in this room.
That is true. I have to tell you, folks, when we first got on the air before we started recording, you had your sunglasses on, and with the black background and the black shirt. Yeah, here we go. So if you're on YouTube, does that not look cool? I mean, Men in Black. All right, my friend. Well, welcome back to the program. We do this on a pretty regular basis where we do episodes called Dear USPAP Instructor. These are questions that come from our listeners. Tim, are you ready for that?
We are ready, Dustin. So let's go.
Well, this first one I have to set up a little bit because this did not come as a direct question to the program. This actually did not even come into my own Facebook page that members of my All-Star team can be a part of. This came to a different forum. I'll just say it that way, a different forum that I happen to belong to, and I monitor and just kind of, keep my ear to the ground as to what appraisers are talking about. So I'm not going to out this person. We're not going to use a name. We're not going to use a gender. We're not going to use the exact question. I'm just going to give you the gist of it. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Thank you.
That work? Okay, awesome.
That work.
So the question, Tim, has to do with arm's length transaction. And basically it is this. Somebody wrote a question, and the reason I want to reach out to you on this is because I was taught years ago as an instructor that if one person has a question, most likely someone else in the audience has the same question. And so don't ignore questions. They're all important. And I assume that many in our audience might have similar questions regarding this. Maybe not the specific instance, which I will give you, but similar. So regarding arm's length transaction, in this case, this particular appraiser had done and completed an appraisal on a home, sent it in to the client. The client came back and said, "We want you to change your rating as far as change the box basically on the form where you said it was an arm's length. We believe it's a non-arm's length, or vice versa. I don't remember which, but it has to do with the fact that there was a tenant in a home who now wanted to buy the property. And so the appraiser felt one way about it being an arm's length transaction. The client felt a different way. Tim, what say you? Is this an arm's length transaction or not?
Dustin, this is that's with so much in appraisal. There's that two-word answer. It depends.
Yes.
I know you hate that, but that's just so Dustin, at first glance, you would, really, you'd look at that kind of closely.
Sure.
And you might decide, nah, the guy's a tenant. It wasn't arm's length. But, I told you I had a surprise for you. So let me show you the surprise.
I love surprises.
And I'm going to, okay, you can see on the screen. This is from Black's Law Dictionary.
Okay.
The reason we went to Black's Law Dictionary is because USPAP does not define arm's length.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
And the GSEs do not define arm's length. Now, the reason USPAP doesn't define arm's length is because it does not see that as a term that needs a special appraisal definition.
Because there's already a definition from Black's Law Dictionary.
Exactly. So now Black's Law Dictionary says of or relating to dealings between two parties who are not related. Now, if the definition stopped there, then the answer to the question would be no, it's not arm's
Right.
length.
No brainer. Right.
But then there's a complicating factor.
Got
Then
it.
it says, or not on close terms and who are presumed to have roughly equal bargaining power. So this second part, or not on close terms, and who are presumed. Now, notice it doesn't say assumed; it says presumed. Presume is to presume something is much stronger than to assume something.
Okay.
Assume something, you hope you're right. When you presume something, you know you're right, and you're looking to prove it.
Okay, got it.
So, and I'm going to stop the share here. Okay, now let's take a look at this. Okay, let's put this on a real world basis. All right, you own a rental unit, and Mr. and Mrs. Jones have been living there for a couple of years, and they're neither fabulous tenants nor lousy tenants. You know, you get a check every month. And, you know, they complained about the leaking plumbing, and you sent somebody over there and fixed it. And they were having a loud party one night. The neighbors complained, and you went over there and asked them to calm down, and they apologized, and they did. Okay. Now, the guy comes to you and says, Dustin, you know, we really like it here. Would you be willing to sell us this unit? Okay. Now, obviously, you have a business relationship, you have a contract. Even if it's an oral and you have a contract. Now, just to assume that any dealings is not arm's length is going to assume that you say, oh, sure, I'll sell you the unit and I'll give you a great big discount on it and I'll open my books up to you and let you take advantage of me. and I'll just sit there at the closing table, leaving money there and laugh about it as you pick it up and walk to the bank. Now, that's not going to happen.
Right.
Okay. So even though, yes, it's a tenant, okay, you're all of a sudden, you go from being Mr. Nice Dustin to being Mr. Son of a bitch. Because you're going to sell that property for absolutely as much money as you possibly can.
Of course.
And who cares what the buyer thinks of that? It's not your job to look out for the buyer. You're not the buyer's attorney. You're not the buyer's clergy person. Okay. You're a hard-nosed businessman who worked hard for the money that you spent to buy it. And you deserve every dime of the profit that there is for you there. Okay. Now, you want to give it away? That's your choice. But assuming you don't, and I assume you don't, then to say your relationship is not arm's length buggers credibility. Because you are not looking, you are not, oh, well, sure, you're my friend and I like you and your wife makes good chocolate chip cookies. Yeah. Well, that all very well may be true. But no, you're going to get as absolutely as much money as you possibly can. And if the guy says, well, we can't afford that, your response is, okay, well, get back with me when you can. Thank you. Bye. Click.
Right.
Okay. So the point is, Dustin, you cannot merely assume a sale is or is not arm's length until you pick up the phone and you talk to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
In other words, there's got to be some critical thinking involved. There's got to be some analysis involved, not just a knee-jerk reaction to a rule of thumb. That clients don't pay us for knee-jerk reactions to rules of thumb.
Hmm.
They pay us for our analytics. They pay us for our experience. They pay us to explain what's going on in the market. And the only way we know what's going on in the market is to pick up the phone or send an email and ask. And I would say, given nothing more than the information you just provided to me, I would say that that is an arm's length transaction, because the parties have no relationship to each other and are on an equal footing for negotiation.
I'm going to throw a wrench into this, Tim. And I think I understand where you're coming from. In other words, it's not a black and white thing, right?
Right.
I love how you started out the definition. If it ends with related, that's easy. You can do a blood test and you can tell, right? I mean, that's
Right.
a black and white definition, but then it goes into the details of, the relationship, the friendship, the association you might have. If it's going to affect the market value, then, that's when the critical thinking comes in. Years ago, I did an appraisal on a place very similar, in a situation where there was a right to buy, a rent to own, if you will. So you've got a renter in there, they've got an agreement, and I came in to do the appraisal for the purchase. And as I started into it, they had told me the purchase price, but they had not given me the contract yet. And I could tell right off the bat, based on the comps, the neighborhood, the condition of the house. I'd done the inspection. I started doing the write-up. I could tell that the purchase price was significantly lower than was typical for the market, right? Even before I came up with an actual, appraised value, I could tell that it was way off. So I start to question, right? I start to think, what's going on here? Why is this thing selling for less than market, and not just less than, but significantly less than, right? My thought immediately was, is this an arm's length transaction? Well, Tim, what it ended up being was they were not related. I don't think they were friends. It was none of that. What had happened, and we could talk about the wisdom in this, but that's not really the topic for today. What had happened is that the landlord, the owner of the property, had made up the contract when the rent started, which was about 5 years previous, and he had based the purchase price on the current market value 5 years ago, and the tenant could execute that contract whenever they wanted to. So they waited 5 years, they executed the contract, and they stuck with the original purchase price. Now, I know that's not to arm's length necessarily, kind of a side note, but my point in sharing this story is, would you agree, Tim, that sometimes you can tell whether it's arm's length or not, at least to start to have question by looking at the market and finding out what's going on? And if there's a question mark, that's when you start to investigate.
Okay, the market has nothing to do with whether that was arm's length or not.
Exactly.
Okay, the market value is whatever the market value was.
Right.
And it sounds like the seller negotiated a bad contract.
Right.
Okay, now that may not meet the definition of market value, because apparently you've got at least one party who's a complete dummy. We're supposed to account for stuff like that. But the buyer, or excuse me, the seller was the one who said, here, yeah, I'll be happy to sell it to you, and here's the price. So to me, yeah, that's arm's length. Wasn't market value, but it was arm's length.
Right.
And you would look at that and you'd, $150,000. Oh, look, everything else is 180 to 210.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I know that's okay. I'm not going to give that contract any weight, because that's definitely not its market value. But the fact that it is or it isn't arm's length is irrelevant.
Yeah.
That because you went out to the market and you said, okay, market's 180 to 210. This is 150. No. There's the critical thinking.
There you go. Yeah. And that's really the point I wanted to make or emphasize. You made the point. I wanted to emphasize, folks, appraisers, put on your appraisal hat, do some critical thinking, right? Sometimes we get in those boxes and we start checking and we think, okay, this is the situation. But until you start to put your critical thinking caps on and actually going through that process, your initial thoughts might change as you do so. We're speaking, of course, with Mr. Tim Anderson. He is the appraiser's advocate. When we get back, we've got another question from one of our listeners, Tim. First, want to pause and remind you of some great sponsors. No, not sunglasses today, but we are sponsored by OREP Insurance. OREP, of course, is the insurance that I use for my E&O because of many, many reasons, folks. But one of them is the benefits that come with OREP. I'll give you two. One of them is that they give you a reimbursement for some counsel when you are before a state board. Now, remember, E&O is about lawsuits, right? It's not about state board complaints, but OREP goes one step further and helps you out with those state board complaints as well. That is one benefit of OREP. Another one, speaking of Mr. Tim Anderson, is continuing education. And one of the courses that I have taken through OREP for free, no extra cost involved, and for CE, by the way, could count toward my CE, was taught by Mr. Tim Anderson. Folks, if you're with any other E&O, you should check out OREP. They have great benefits. OREP.org is where you find out more. That's OREP.org. Alamode, of course, is the software that I choose. Just this week, folks, I was in the mobile end of Total. And by the way, Total has the best mobile app out there, and just doing some things to help my efficiency. For example, you can change around the form you may be filling out vicariously a 1004 in the field. In other words, it's not going to look like a 1004. You can choose the fields that you see in the field, the fields of the 1004 that you see when you're at the property. You can also change the order that they come to you. For example, I put mine in order of outside in. I usually do the exterior first and then the interior. So I made sure that the questions about patios and roof type and foundation came first, and the room counts and the condition and the quality of the kitchen and the materials on the floor and the cabinets and that kind of thing came next. You can do that, folks. You can do many, many things with Alamode. It's just one of the great benefits of this great company. Check them out by going to alamode.com, or you can find out more at 800 Alamode. Welcome back to the program. We've got Mr. Man in Black himself, Mr. Tim Anderson, the appraiser's advocate. Of course, Tim, you provide quite a service to appraisers, and I tell you, when it's needed, it's needed, and thankfully you are there to help appraisers to navigate the waters of a state board complaint, for example, or to prevent such from happening. Tell us a little bit more about the services that you of course charge for, but provide for appraisers.
Dustin, I'd rather help an appraiser avoid going to the state rather than have to help the appraiser defend against the state. You know, it's kind of like your doctor. Your doctor wishes you'd go there before you got sick,
right?
Because it's easy, the work's easier. So that's what I prefer to do. I would prefer appraisers send work into me for review before they're before the state, because once they're before the state, you're at the mercy of bad hair days and bad burritos for lunch, and ignorance on the part of the board members or the board attorney. I think I told you once a board was going to discipline an appraiser for not having photos in the report, saying it was a violation of USPAP Standard 1. And it was possible to show the board that USPAP Standard 1 didn't say anything about photos.
Yeah,
and that particular charge was dropped. But you know, once you're going up before the state, then things get real serious real fast, and they also get real expensive real fast. So one of the things I recommend is on a statistically significant number of appraisal reports, you put a second pair of eyes. And that means you're going to have to hire an outside consultant and who is going to go over it and say, well, yeah, this works, that works. Oh, you might want to check this, and nope, get rid of that right now. And that way, when it finally goes before the board, then the board can look at it and say, wow, your work file is okay, everything in the appraisal is proper, the report itself is persuasive. Okay, we might have done a few things differently, but there's nothing here we can gripe about. No, we're going to drop the charges. And quite frankly, that happens about half the time. But then we're worried about the half that it doesn't happen.
Got it. Got it. All right, my friend. Thank you. If people want to get a hold of you, of course, your
Tim
services.
at theappraisersadvocate.com.
One more time. I talked over you. Do it again.
Tim at theappraisersadvocate.com.
Love it. Okay. Last question for today, Mr. Tim Anderson. This comes from Paul. Paul is one of our listeners. He says, I live near a state border in a small town of, and I redacted, I often find quote unquote comps just over the border in another state, another redacted state. I have never used any because I am not licensed in that other state, but I am second guessing myself now. Can I use sales from a jurisdiction that I'm not licensed in? What say you, Tim?
Yes.
Okay, good. And we're going to wrap up there, folks.
A sale is not a comparable until the appraiser determines it has the same highest and best use as the subject. So in many cases, appraisers have used the comp across the street and the comp 10 miles away. Well, 10 miles away may be another state. Now, the issue, somebody's going to say, well, you're not competent in that second state. If you live 10 miles away, you've probably been to that city a number of times, and you probably know what's going on. And then geographic competency is a whole lot deeper, quite frankly, than a lot of appraisers want to think it is. But the point is, you want to know what's going on in town, you pick up the phone and you call 3 brokers and you ask them. At that point, you'll know about 90% of what you need to know.
Yeah.
And the 10% that you don't know for your typical residential real estate appraisal, you probably don't need. If you're appraising vacant land or ag land or pasture land or stuff like that, no, you probably don't. But just for your basic single family house, no, you can pretty much get that handled after 3 phone calls, assuming you ask the right questions to the right people.
So competency is one thing. The question also asked about legality, if you will.
There's absolutely nothing illegal about that.
Okay.
Look very closely at the USPAP. Standard 1, when Standard 1 talks about the sales comparison approach, it's all of 27 words long. And USPAP does not even use the word comparable in the context of telling you how to choose comps. That's up to you. The GSEs make it very clear that it's up to the appraiser to choose the comps, not the AMC, not the lender. It's up to the appraiser. Now, the AMC and the lender can point out mistakes. Okay, and if you make a mistake, fix it. But if you think that the best comp, well, for example, where I live, the borderline, I live in Palm Beach County, the borderline between Palm Beach County and the county to the north is no big deal. It's the yellow line down the middle of the road. And the houses across the street from each other are essentially the same. So it would be no big deal to use a comp. Again, you have to adjust for the differences, but or account for them somehow. But if you are appraising commercial properties, that might be different because one state may have a rent control and the other state may not. But just your basic single family house, no, I think you'd find yourself in a lot more trouble using a comp outside of an HOA when your subject was inside an HOA. You didn't account for the difference that being in the HOA causes.
In other words, understand your market, folks. Understand.
Yeah.
That's what we're paid to. Mr. Tim Anderson, thank you, my friend. As always, your expertise is appreciated here. These questions come in from our listeners. Of course, they can email you directly, tim@theappraisersadvocate.com. I don't say it as well as Tim does. I'll let him say it here in a minute. Or the coach at theappraisercoach.com. Tim, one more time, your email address.
Tim@theappraisersadvocate.com.
Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.